Om Tare Du Tare Du Re Soha. Om Tare Du Tare Du Re Soha. Om Tare Du Tare Du Re Soha. Om Tare Du Tare.
Okay, before we are going back to the text, by the way. Procrastinated long enough. But before we jump into that, does anyone have any questions or anything that's come up with your practice, anything we previously discussed? I don't usually get a question, but it usually gives me a chance to take a drink of water. Okay. You always wait till we get into it. All right. So in the text, we're going to how it all begins, how we get in this whole predicament of samsara. And those of you who may not be familiar with, there's a symbolic image of the whole path, everything around, well, the whole creation of samsara, the inner workings and the way that we exist. It's called the wheel of life. And it's just a visual presentation of the whole thing, from the misperceptions, the attachment, the aversion, good karma, bad karma, realms, and how we experience our lives and who we are. And then this wheel goes up and it's surrounded by 12 links of dependent origination. So that's the wheel. And these 12 links describe how we get in this predicament. Within is the predicament we're in. So it's called samsara, conditioned existence. The 12 links will go into great detail, and the key is you can break those 12 links at one spot and then be free of all of samsara. And maybe at some point we'll cover that. Yeah, okay, I think we'll cover that. Okay, great, that'd be good. And these links, they arise, they give rise in a particular way. And the first three are really this aspect of consciousness that will, when even at birth, the contact, name and form, consciousness and form, sperm and egg, and all that, that begins this particular journey. But it all starts with what's labeled as ignorance, and I like to use it as misperception. So it's misperception or ignorance, formative action, karma, and then we get to name and form when that happens. But I think we'll probably not make it through the misperception tonight. We'll see how it goes. I get ambitious sometimes, but me, we can talk for an hour in one sentence. So let's get to the text. So what I did was, since they really go into great detail in terms of different schools of thought, different schools of Buddhism, different perspectives, different arguments, I just wanted us to focus on these key points that we can digest and we don't get too lost in the weeds. So highlighted a few of these parts. The first link, ignorance, is the specific moments of ignorance grasping to inherent existence and the view of personal identity that lie behind the motivation, performance, and completion of a virtuous or non-virtuous karma, powerful enough to project rebirth in samsara. It is not other moments of ignorance or other types of ignorance that occur in our lives. In short, this first link, ignorance, is the view of a personal identity that newly motivates its, these 12 links. it motivates the second branch, formative action. This ignorance actively grasps the self as existing in a way it does not. It is the root of samsara, the principal cause of rebirth in cyclic existence. So, yeah, not much to explain there, right? We can just roll through. All right, maybe we'll pause and take a look at first and foremost, with the 12 links, they're looking in terms of, rebirth and so forth. And you're going to see that it'll play out even if you think of it in terms of this one life as well. The tricky part about anything in us trying to explain how we exist, whether from a scientific model or Buddhist model or other religious model, is can something come from nothing, right? Can something come from nothing? So how do we exist? And then some people would say, well, our consciousness and all that is an emergent property, of what happens when a body's born, right? So sperm and egg, something's starting to happen that our sense of consciousness will begin at that point. And then when this body dies, that consciousness is gone. It's it, one life done. Buddhist point of view would be that consciousness is not an emergent property of the brain or the body, but rather the consciousness has always been here, and that consciousness sees itself differently. As this body ends, the consciousness continues and just starts seeing itself differently. So understanding this is, I think, critical to start to thinking about how you perceive self and your experience. From a Buddhist perspective, it's like consciousness didn't, what was the moment before consciousness and the moment before that and the moment before that can't come from nothing. And it's not material. The brain's material, chemicals, electricity and all that, that's all an organ basically. And so their view is that there's correlates, consciousness and brain correlates or mind-body experience. But that consciousness itself is not material. Body is material. And that mind is primary, material is secondary. A lot of science is just the other way around. Body is primary, and that the mind is an emergent property of all this activity. So we're not going to say one or the other. I'm just going to give you both perspectives. We all figure it out on our own. And as we keep talking, the only way to really engage is to challenge, question. Don't just, well, I read it in this Buddhist book, therefore. It's like, okay, let's investigate this and let's explore. What is really, I find powerful is that the Buddhists can tell you everything that we're going to talk about, the 12 links, how consciousness and formative actions and these karmic conditionings create in this moment name and form of body and mind coming together, this experience that we're having, detailing exactly how it leads to all mental afflictions, bodily forms, activities, impulses, desires, takes you through all that. Even their books, but without microscopes, describe things down to atom type forms, and then they highlight exactly what happens at death, which elements dissolve, what that looks like, what that experience is at which stage of death, and they describe the exact process in great detail. And people practice this, and some of I watched my teacher go through this process. So there's a lot of information there. And, you know, we can figure it out if you do it. So that's one way. Could be a bit challenging. And, but teachers and as my specific teacher I can talk to directly because I was there, you know, every day they've gone through these practices and they actually practice, you know, the death process and staying conscious through it and tapping into that clear light, primordial wisdom, and their essence. And it's like lucid dreaming. You know, we go to sleep at night. You can learn to be conscious through your whole sleep process. Be conscious in your dreams. Know it's a dream, and go through that whole process. There's nothing magical about that. There's books on it, and not even just Buddhist books, but lucid dreaming. You know, psychologists teach you how to do it. I played with that a little bit in my earlier years, and so it's kind of like that they practice that, you know, through the death process, staying conscious, knowing the body's dying, and then staying conscious in the intermediate states and through to their next form, their next perception of self. So it's just good to have that bandwidth as this gets presented, as where they're coming into at this point when we think about misunderstanding, misperception. There's a sense of a self, right? There's something that is sensing things. And in this 12 links of dependent origination, that misunderstanding of self and inherent existence, it's said to already be there. And then Buddhism says, well, can't come from nowhere. Had to be there the moment before. It had to be there the moment before. You know, you can't get something out of nothing. And so they always talk about beginningless time. The Buddha never was addressed. And so I always just talk about, we can't explain where it all began, chicken, egg, all that. They just explain what we experience. And so it's starting with some concept of a sense of self that is misapprehending a sense of self and what they're experiencing as being inherently existent. So anybody remember what inherently existent means? Not to put, you know, 28 of you on blast or anything. But
That means existing independently, without you don't need anything else. Right? There's a solid something occurred in here that I can go find and point to and touch, maybe even mentally touch, right? Find somewhere.
that's independent, right?
It's independent, yeah.
Yeah, it's independent. So that, you know, I can look over at Laura, she's clearly not me, right? That's pretty obvious. And we're very separate. And, but then when I go to try to figure out, is there anything about Laura that's independent, separate, inherently existing just from her own side? I'm not going to find that to be true, right? All of you experience a different Laura than I do. Same physical form, same everything. And then Laura's changing moment to moment. Laura exists in dependence upon, you know, everything that has happened in your life and your parents, their parents, and so forth. And so what we find is there's nothing in this world, in our experience, that exists independently. That means inherently self-existent. Everything's interdependent. But that's not how we see things or experience them typically. You might even think those of us that live here, Mount Sopris looks pretty independent, right? You look a little more deeply, you'll see different trees growing, you see different, you know, soil movements and lakes and animals. Even the mountain itself changes, and and it's dependent upon things. It's changing all the time. So we don't typically see people like that. We don't typically see like this room, which is pretty independent and existent, but it's all interdependent in all aspects of it. So, just at the start, we start seeing ourselves, as Kurt was describing, as a sense that there's me, there's you, we're very separate. I exist independently. Those things out there exist independently. And that's the problem. That's the starting point problem. Because that's not how we exist. And, we can figure that out now. But even knowing that's not going to help you from not thinking that, Jimmy's a jerk, right? Thinking that's how Jimmy is. I did check to make sure we had no Jimmys online right now. So, that was a safe comment. So, so we're coming in with a sense of self that it's misunderstanding from the gate. And the point that they were making is this type of ignorance is one that will directly create the next link. And it's out of this misunderstanding that we'll get to formative action. But if we look at just misunderstanding in general, it just sounds better than ignorance, right? Yeah. I mean, I don't want to call you all ignorant. That just doesn't sound right. Misunderstood, misapprehending. Yeah, it's more palatable. And so, think about how many ways that we make people permanent, make people inherently existent, label people, see them in a particular way, think that's how they exist, or ourselves. How do we think about ourselves when you describe yourself? Are you describing how you are, or are you describing perceptions of yourself? We've had a talk more than once about we can attribute qualities to ourselves that are true, right? So I'm an anxious person. Or are you a person who's anxious sometimes? And are there times where you're not anxious? I'm a people person, or I'm not a people person. Maybe I'm not a people person, but sometimes I'm around people and I'm comfortable. Sometimes I'm a people person that doesn't want to talk to anybody at all. But we start building this narrative about who we are and how we are, and then we reify it. We make it true. We describe ourselves that way. And then we don't even recognize that if I think I'm an impatient person, I don't recognize all the times I've been patient. We have, a real misunderstanding of ourselves on a very baseline level as humans. And if you need any proof whatsoever, read somebody's Match.com description of themselves. And, you're going to see what we write. Imagine if we wrote what we really felt about ourselves on a dating site. Probably not going to go so well. Yeah, I'm kind of an insecure, neurotic person at times, but, I got a good heart. And sometimes I say stupid stuff and, get a little bit reactive, and I have some intimacy issues, but I'm working on them, and I would like to, it'd be hard to get a good date. We usually get I'm a sensitive, nurturing person, that enjoys, deep, reflective conversations, and nice cups of tea, deep thoughts, so what would happen if we wrote had self-critical thoughts about ourselves, that would be a real thing. It's just, I screw things up. Well, I never live up to this, and that, and yet it's interesting because we can hold both views of ourselves, right? We can hold a view of our higher selves, the way we really see ourselves in our best lights, and that's what we would share. And then we can also hold ourselves in a very critical way about all of our shortcomings and the way I don't do well, and the things I need to work on, and my issues, and feel pretty insecure at the same time. And so you can see it's kind of confusing just even thinking about ourselves. And so this misunderstanding of ourselves we can see pretty clearly at times, and totally forget about it, and then just think I'm this kind of person, it's my personality, so forth, and not recognize that you're changing moment to moment. You have the capacity to change in many different ways. You can learn new things, you can have different attitudes, different thoughts, you can even have different dispositions. All of that is changeable, malleable, and but we don't often think like that. You just So there's a misunderstanding there, and then there's a misunderstanding of the experience we're having, and seeing everything else out there as independent and separate, not interdependent and subjective. And I'm having a subjective experience all the time of you, and anything I'm doing has a lot to do with just my own cultural upbringing, environment, and what I'm used to, and so how I see things. I've had escargot, but I'm not really into it. Okay, and some people think eating snails is great. So we all have our conditioning, and it's through that lens of conditioning that we experience things, and we forget that we're always having a subjective experience. And so going back to the text there, it's grasping to an inherent, right, independent self-existence and a view of personal identity, and that lies behind the motivation, performance, and completion of virtuous or non-virtuous karma, powerful enough to project rebirth into samsara, to initiate that. There's three words here: motivation, performance, and completion. Those are very important words in this context. Motivation, perform. I actually haven't used I've seen action and completion. Interesting. So it's really good to know these things, and great to rationalize yourself out of a lot of negative actions, by the way. It's good to have some of these things to know.
Is that word completion? Is that reflection?
That the act has completed. So, for example, I hit you, right? Maybe it was accidentally. There's no motivation to hit you, right? But I hit you, and the act of hitting did happen. It did complete. So the karma around hitting you by accident without being motivated, the action took place, and it did complete. It wasn't just an intention to. It all happened. That's a complete karma. Being motivated to hit someone, having it happen, and the action complete, versus wanting to hit someone, trying to hit someone, it doesn't complete. You miss them. Didn't happen.
But I thought a lot of karma depends upon after the action happens.
How you feel about it. Yeah. So there's right. In this capacity, it's initiating. It's in that more formative state before we even have sort of body. But in our normal life, karma is going to have that last piece. How do you feel about it? Do I feel bad that I hit someone, or do I feel pretty good about it? So then karma gets related to in that sense. And I guess probably in this presentation, they're adding that piece into the completion. But there is karma that doesn't complete because someone tried to do it and the act wasn't completed. Technically, no. So so that would help shall remain nameless, who was asking about like vows and precepts. Do you really break them if you weren't motivated to break them? And did you do an action and then you know, how'd you feel about it? You know, was it really complete? So yeah. Kurt.
Yeah. It's interesting. Is this talking about, is this a linear process? I mean, is it like the first link happens, then the second link happens, and it only happens once for every life? Are we talking about a single lifetime? Or are we talking, it seems like they're talking about karma in here, that it's happening over and over again. So what are we talking about from a
we're gonna go linear right now, okay? But it's actually linear in the middle of a big cycle. So it's but to give you just the view, we're only at ignorance. But this ignorance is going to initiate what is called formative action, which is the second link, which initiates and goes into karma, these sort of collective, the imprints that we have. And so technically, you would have all that existent from your previous, you know, physical form that's coming. And then that will be accessed at the time that it comes in contact with a body, you know, a sperm, egg, you know, union here. And then name and form arises. So you have this sort of linear. This leads to this, so it's dependent origination. And then once you have the name and form, then you're going to have these other pieces which will come into contact, things that I like, things I don't like, how it feels, and, you know, our attachment to them. We'll go through them all. You can, you know, easily pull up a list of the 12 links and just kind of get these little brief descriptions. And then it goes through life, and then at the end, this sort of old age thing is, you know, everything that's happened would lead to this again, ignorance, which in this formless way of being will create the initiation cycle again. So right now it's in a linear thing. But the key here, and why I want to spend, I think, some pretty helpful time, is that whether we believe in reincarnation or don't believe in reincarnation, you're going to see that misperception is going to give rise to a lot of suffering. And that accurately understanding self and experience is going to eliminate a lot of suffering. And so it all starts right here in that way. Let me get to the next thing I highlighted. Yeah, let's read the second paragraph here. The notion of grasping inherent existence may seem abstract to us at first, but it is our frequent experience. When intense craving arises in us, the I, right, John, appears to be independent of all other factors, and we apprehend it as existing in this way. I must have this. Cherry pie is excluded from this specific example. When anger rules our minds, the self appears very solid, as if it exists under its own power. That disturbs me. I'm angry at that. The I seems to be somewhere within our bodies and minds, but also separate from them. This grasping is a troublemaker. It instigates and empowers afflictions that create karma, which ripen in lower rebirths. It also instigates polluted virtuous motivations, which bring higher rebirths, but still keep us bound in samsara. It is a false view because when we examine how the I exists, we see it is not our minds, our bodies, the collection of body and mind, or something apart from them. The I exists by mere designation. So that's clear. We don't have
Can you
to.
back to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to put it back up.
There's that line of polluted virtuous motivation.
Mhm.
What does that mean?
That means that it's under the control of our conditioned existence. So polluted in the sense that it's not pure view, it's not free of karma. It's still always somewhat tainted around a sense of a way that we exist. And so even, for example, we can be good practitioners, have meditated a lot, we understand interdependence, and we're doing good, wholesome, virtuous action. But we're not free from our polluted view of self yet, our misunderstanding yet. So polluted in that sense. And so we can be doing bodhisattva activities in human form, doing good stuff, but we still kind of, have a sense of John's John, and, other people are other people, and we're not awakened yet. So we're,
Are all virtuous actions inherently polluted? It's because we're in this block.
unless you actually virtue and is pretty much related to karma, so it's going to be polluted in that sense. But can a awakened being, so awakened beings don't create karma, right? And they engage in wholesome activities, but they're not creating karma because their view is pure. So we're always creating some form of tainted karma, but good karma is helpful because it puts us in the better situations to purify. Yeah. So we're conditioned still. Greta.
Hey, thanks for the talk so far.
I like that. So far, you'll withhold the thanks for the rest of the talk. That may not be so good.
To be continued. Yeah. I was just thinking about, like, I guess I was wondering, because the anger stuff, it comes up in me like my intention is definitely good. I know that. And sometimes the best I can do is not act, or just be aware of the first thought of like, fuck this guy, when I'm driving or whatever. Excuse my language, sorry.
I think everybody can relate to that technical term. Yes.
Okay. But and I'm just wondering, like, does that still count, as like when you're just doing the best that you can, like if you're angry, but you're not acting on it, is that still, and you're aware that your intention is to cause no harm to yourself or others, but the feeling is still pretty persistent, right? Which is conditioning, right? And it takes a while to dismantle the conditioning or whatever.
What you're describing, by the way, is virtuous.
Got it. Okay, yeah. Sometimes
anger's arising, it's there, and you are not feeding it, right? You're counteracting it or allowing it to dissipate. You're working with it, right?
Yeah, definitely. 1000%.
That's virtue. That's good karma.
Okay, because like sometimes it takes a lot of energy, like to catch it, because it really is a powerful force, you know? And sometimes I'm not sure, because like if I'm not paying close enough attention with mindfulness, I can definitely get self-righteous. You know, I'm specifically thinking about driving in New York City. It comes out the most there. It feels the most unmanageable. And sometimes I do like cut people off anyway, you know, or whatever. I'm doing the best I can, but I'm just wondering like where that stands in this reading, or that last couple of sentences or whatever. Because it is like there's the cognitive dissonance, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, and anger is going to pop up, and as it pops up, we can get self-righteous, and believe it or not, even after listening to this talk, you might get pissed off. It can happen, and we're triggered in those emotional states, and that's all stemming from, if you look all the way back, all the way back, all the way back. And so it's this old stuff, right? And a sense of self, and a sense of they shouldn't be driving like that. Clearly I know how to drive. Nobody else in the world can really figure this out. I got this down. Why don't we all follow the rules? Which, by the way, just a curiosity, if you're on a freeway and it says 65 miles an hour, why are we going 35? Like, how does that work? I mean, technically, if everyone was going 65, wouldn't that? I've never figured that one out. But I digress. So we have our triggers, and the triggers trigger anger and frustration, and our journey is to understand, as from a positive point of view, that karma is ripening, and how you respond is you're creating a different future for yourself, right? So how you respond is the karma you're creating for the future. What just arose was from the karma of the past. And so when you get angry or experience anger, would be a more accurate way of saying it, it's not a terrible thing. If we can respond in a healthy way, that karma is exiting us. And the virtue of how you respond, even if it's not great, but the motivation, as you're talking about, is to counteract it, you're creating a whole different karmic imprint for your future.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. A lot more empowering, isn't it? Yeah. Keith.
This might be an overly technical question, but the curiosity keeps coming up in my mind, so I decided to ask it. So, how is it known that we're born with this fundamental misperception of an independent, inherent self versus that being socially conditioned into us as we're raised by parents and, through society?
Yeah. So, the easy answer is that there have been many who've gone through this whole process and who document it very clearly. So there is that of teachers and lamas and practitioners who have gone through this process. But then the Buddha basically described it, of course. But that's not going to help you. Someone who lived a long time ago and said this way it is, can't really rely on that, right? You need to kind of check it out. So one way to know, and this is something that Alan Wallace is keen on, is that when you achieve shamatha, actually achieve shamatha, all 9 levels, achieve shamatha, you're sitting in substrate awareness. And in substrate awareness, that's his label for it, this ground of becoming, store consciousness, lots of labels for it. It is when you're in that substrate consciousness, this would be the sort of store consciousness that would go from life to life. when you're in shamatha, your sense consciousness and taste, all these sense consciousness, they've dissolved into just this base consciousness. So you're not aware of body, sound, hearing, anything. You're just in pure awareness that's non-conceptual, blissful, luminous. You're resting there. You're able to rest there for days if you want. That's achieving shamatha. So in that state, you could choose to trace back through that line of consciousness and tap back into memories and thoughts from before this life and do that. And so one of the things that he's hoping to do in his contemplative observatory is take regular people, achieve shamatha, have them go back to when they're like 2 years old, what happened, what's an experience, then can they go check, make sure that's true, and then have them go back to before they were born, describe some things, see if they can find it to be true, scientifically, and do that. So that's another method. On a sort of, there's some great books actually that Katie's recommended, where people do a lot of research on sort of that process. But for me, just on a very simple, because I'm a simple guy, I like to watch newborn and early developmental children, and you just see they come in the world with certain qualities and attributes and tendencies, and kids in the same parents, twins even, can have different attributes and qualities, same genes, same genetics, same all that, and same parents. And you can see, some have these types of qualities, some have these other qualities. And for me, I've met, we've got prodigies who come in, right? They come in, how to explain a prodigy versus someone else, if we kind of think about things. And then you can, for me, it makes sense in that way. I can start to go, well, maybe that's possible. As I said, and if anyone hasn't read the story of the passing of Geshe Gelson, I can repost it in our community, but I know some of you have, and it just describes his whole process of death, and the going into meditation in 3 days, body dead, and all that, all the things that lead to that. And I mean, I was there for it, so got to see it. And these are just common stories of people who are practitioners. Running Towards Mystery is a great book. Priyadarshi, Tenzin Priyadarshi, telling his story as a young man in India of a highly educated class, who 10 years old, having all these visions and escaping his parents, going all across India, goes up to the north, trains on his own, gets to Vulture's Peak, where the teaching of the Buddha on emptiness took place, the Heart Sutra, and a Japanese monastery there, and knocking on that door, and they open it, and we've been waiting for you. And this little 10-year-old kid gets into this monastery, learns Japanese, and becomes, in this monastic life. His parents eventually find him. He negotiates with them and says, this is where I belong. And parents want him to have an education. And he says, okay, if you go to school, you can stay here, but you got to do your education as well. So you get up early, do his monk stuff, go to school. Tibetans find him when he's a teenager and recognize him as Kuno Rinpoche, this previous, masters, and lives with them. And but throughout his whole book, he's telling all these incredible, just his life journey, and how these things had ripened, and how he knew certain things or experienced certain things. long story short, he'd actually go to college. He's Jesuit University in Syracuse. And double majored, double minored simultaneously. The guy's brilliant. Speaks 9 languages fluently. Japanese, of course, is one of them. Trained in the Zen tradition, Tibetan traditions. He's actually of all the lineages within the Tibetan tradition. And, trained with yogis, a great master, and speaks perfect English and pretty young. And so there's people like that exist, that you can talk to. We've hosted him here. And so, this is where we start to investigate is everything John just told you is that remotely true, or there's a bunch of nonsense, And if you haven't read his book, Running Towards Mystery. And he doesn't tell it in any way other than, just this way. He's not claiming anything. As a matter of fact, he doesn't even say he's a tuku or any of that. But he describes his personal experience. And and of course, David Gonzalez, who I met. So anyway, we can explore, are there examples of this? Is there, does it make, does it seem to add up? There's a bunch of people telling woo stories. We investigate. And so that's how we, the only way to know is to know. And, but sometimes we can take what evidence we have and discern whether there's a probability, right? That's how we do a lot of things in our lives is, certain things seem to work. So I'm going to try this next thing. And it may or may not hold up. So that's my short answer. Wow, where are we at 7:08? We haven't got to the other paragraph of learning. Let me just take a look at it. I don't think it's long. You can see why I've been hesitating getting back into the text here, right? We're going right into the deep waters. Okay. Yeah, let's just read this because I wouldn't want you to go away feeling like you have a grasp of this stuff. Of course. As the initial motivation, first link ignorance, okay, that's the first link ignorance, is the principal driving force that leads to formative karma. Distorted conceptions may arise after it, grasping the impermanent as permanent. What is dukkha, right, as the nature of suffering by nature, as happiness. The unattractive as attractive, the selfless as having a coarse self. So this is describing our whole issues right here. We try to make things permanent that are impermanent. We really grasp onto things that create suffering as though it's happiness. We mistake the unattractive as attractive, the selfless as having a coarse sense of self. Distorted attention that exaggerates the good or bad qualities of an object may also arise. Hence, I really need this to be happy. I couldn't possibly be happy without this, or this person, or this home, or this thing, right? And yet, believe it or not, some people can still be happy without that particular home. Or I still survived after Jill Miller kicked me to the curb. It wasn't fun, but it was quite painful. Laura's in my life. And, but we really grasp onto and exaggerate these qualities. Just listen to, I'm curious if anyone can find a healthy love song somewhere in the world, like, emotionally healthy, instead of you're the world to me, couldn't live without you, all that stuff. It would be interesting. If you do find that song, I'm interested. Due to these distorted conceptions, the immediate motivation, such as ignorance of karma and its effects, coupled with other afflictions, arise with attachment. We plan, connive, and manipulate to get the objects of our desire We then lie or steal to make them ours. I mean, nobody lies about their income tax, right? When our desires are thwarted, anger arises and develops into malice. We plan and act out retaliatory actions mistakenly, believing that anger protects us. Attachment and anger in the above examples are not a distinct link. Some sages consider them part of the first link. Others say they're the second link. But I thought that would be some good juice to reflect upon. You know, it's how do we exaggerate? How do we get attached? You know, and how's attachment different from deep appreciation? You know, being grateful for the experiences. I need it, you know. And how does I need it not allow me to appreciate the person or the event or the thing that I'm engaged in? And how those distorted views and how we attribute qualities, that person, place, thing, event, that's not inherent within them. It's this experience I'm having based on how I'm perceiving and with them. And so we can kind of play with, you know, how we're making things permanent, unpermanent, how do we exaggerate these qualities, you know? How do we drive in New York traffic in a loving, compassionate way? Since I don't live in New York and I no longer live in LA, I look forward to driving in traffic in New York and LA. I think of it as like a Disneyland ride. And it's this opportunity, because I used to have those skills. You know, I'm born in LA. And I like to see if I still have them, you know. And I felt I was good with LA, but New York, man, that was like, man, I was intimidated. And so I admire you, Greta, to be able to do it every day. But I was like, I felt like I earned my wings, you know, like yeah, I can drive in New York, and people would have me drive them around with yeah, those pictures. But that's because I can leave, you know, like I don't have to do it every day, right? You just have I get to play. It's like going to Disneyland for a week. But what our mind, you know, how we attend to an event, it's going to have a very different effect, right? And so you're starting to play with, you know, how do I shift my attention in a different way? How do I recognize a subjective experience versus, you know, how much when I'm angry is there a real sense of I, or sad, real sense of I, versus when I'm doing pretty good. I'm not really caught up in all that. And can I hold that I am, you know, constantly in a subjective experience, growing and learning these, I live independence upon people, places, things, and events, and hold that more openly. And so that would be my invitation for this week, that we explore that a bit. How's that sound? Unless somebody wants to, you know, ask another rabbit hole question. You know. Okay, let's go ahead and dedicate the merit that we have cultivated from our time together here for the benefit of others and for our own continued spiritual growth, that we may engage in our lives in ways that cultivate freedom, kindness, loving compassion, loving kindness and compassion, be a benefit to others, and ultimately recognize how we do exist. Those who care to, you can join me in the dedication prayer. By this merit, may I soon attain the enlightened state of Guru Buddha, that I may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind not yet born arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase. All right. Thank you all so much. Joy to be with you this Wednesday evening. And please be well. Take good care of yourselves.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
Good to
Thanks,
see
John.
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you.
You're welcome. See you later here and now.
Thanks,
Okay.
John.
See you later. Does that work if I say see you later here and now?
Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re So Ha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re So Ha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu